Is Alex Pereira closer to being in the all-time great conversation after his destructive victory over Khalil Rountree Jr.? Yes guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be doing another 5 things we learned video. We always take a look at the most recent main event, in this case Alex Pereira against Khalil Rountree Jr. And as we go through the video, we reveal one box at a time of something that we learned from this fight. And what a main event it was. I don't think many people expected Khalil Rountree to have quite as much success as he did have early on. In my prediction video, I did say that he'd land some shots early, he would be the aggressor, but I admit myself, I was surprised at how long it did last. He looked really good in that Southpaw stance, and he just kept landing on Pereira. It wasn't looking good early doors, but Pereira did what he always does. He digs deep, he shows himself to be adaptable, and that round 4 was just brutal. He put it on Khalil Rountree, and all credit to Khalil Rountree. What a lionheart, all credit to him. I mean, think about all the talk before that fight on Twitter. Everyone was saying, how does this guy deserve a shot? It's going to be just one-way traffic all fight. But the talk after the fight is the complete opposite. People saying they can't wait to see him fight again. People giving him so much respect, saying that his stock has gone up. So look, he's going to be out for a while. He took a lot of damage in that 4th round. But fair play to him. And Pereira just showed us levels again. Why he is one of the very best in the sport at the moment. But anyway, let's get into it. The first thing that we learned from this fight is how Alex Pereira's calf kick is his insurance policy. It can always get him out of trouble. After a couple of pedestrian rounds for Pereira, because let's face it, that's what it was. He wasn't really doing much damage to Khalil Rountree. He was landing the calf kick, and we're going to talk about that. But really, the big shots were all coming from Khalil Rountree. Pereira kept moving back in a straight line, as we mentioned in our prediction video, and Rountree just couldn't miss with his shots. However, Pereira just touched him with that calf kick, and you could see it start to bother him early on. Pereira landing these calf kicks is just money in the bank. He knows it's going to pay dividends later on. It's such an effective weapon. It means that Pereira doesn't have to panic. He doesn't have to chase rounds. He can just let his opponent do the work whilst he gauges his distance and just touches him with a calf kick, because he knows how devastating it is. He's got enough proof of concept. He's used that kick against so many opponents so far. He knows that it will damage them, that it will slow them down. Especially because much of Khalil Rountree's early success was due to his blitzes. Pereira knew that if he just touches Rountree on that leg, he'll prevent the blitz, he'll slow the blitz down, and that's exactly what happened. After the first couple of rounds, the blitz was nowhere near as effective. And by the 4th round, the blitz was just non-existent. This gave Pereira so much confidence when moving forward, because he knew that he wasn't going to be dealing with that explosive Khalil Rountree that he had to face in the first 2 rounds. And what gave Pereira even more confidence was when he saw Rountree buckle after a couple of those kicks. When you see your opponent buckle from a leg kick, you know that his movement's compromised. You know that the shots aren't going to have as much sting on them. And look, you're against such a dangerous fighter like Rountree. He can still have that one-punch knockout power. But you could see that Pereira wasn't really respecting what was coming back, especially in that 4th round. He knew that he could march him down, even when Rountree was still swinging. And again, we're going to be saying it a lot throughout this video, but all respect to Rountree. Even when Rountree was still swinging, Pereira was happy to march forward and just put it on him. And it all stemmed from that calf kick. It's such an effective weapon, such an effective tool to have. Because we've seen it so many times before with other fighters. When they think they're down, they rush in. They do things that leave openings for their opponent to capitalise on. But Pereira knows that if he stays fairly disciplined and keeps touching him with that calf kick, it can make all the difference in the long run. And that's exactly what happened here. So the first thing we learned is that Alex Pereira's calf kick isn't just an amazing weapon, it's also a great insurance policy. If things aren't going your way, stick to using it, you know it'll pay dividends in the long run. The second thing we learned from this fight is just how good Khalil Rountree is. Not just from a toughness perspective, but that as well, but also his game plan. We know that Pereira's tools that he always goes for is the jab to the body, looking for that left hook upstairs. And Khalil Rountree just completely nullified that in the first 2 rounds. It was really impressive to see. The left hook just wasn't really a danger in this fight. Pereira had to look at other tools, and he did eventually find a lot of success with the right hand. But Rountree's ability to not let the left hook be an issue early on must have given him a lot of confidence. And he looked confident in the fight. It's such a contrast to what we saw moments before the fight. He looked really nervous at that face-off. I know that you can't look too much into body language, especially just a few moments away from a fight, but the way that he was shaking up and down, he did look nervous. Pereira didn't blink. He had that stoic look that he always has, and Rountree looked the polar opposite. He did look nervous, but as soon as that bell rung, you couldn't tell. He was really aggressive. His game plan was really nice. I'm just so impressed with what we saw from Khalil Rountree. And let's not forget, he did drop Alex Pereira. Look, it may have been slightly off balance because Pereira threw that high kick, but Rountree timed that high kick. We saw it a few times, and you can tell that he timed it because Pereira stopped throwing it later on. Rountree had his number with that high kick, and this is great to know if you are a future opponent of Alex Pereira. When he throws that high kick, he is vulnerable to the counter. He holds his hand low and he can get caught. We saw it from Khalil Rountree in that second round. It was a great shot, but it didn't catch him cleanly. You can tell that it was kind of off balance from that head kick because Pereira wasn't wobbled at all. He actually moved forward straight afterwards. But nevertheless, it was a great shot. And fair play to Khalil Rountree, doing damage to Alex Pereira, a light heavyweight. We've not seen that before. So look, Rountree's game plan was great early on. And like I said, before the bell, he looked really nervous. After that first round, he looked exhausted. But these body language things that we saw did not translate to his performance. And look, there wasn't one big shot that put him away, like we used to seeing from Pereira. It was an accumulation, but what an accumulation it was. It was absolutely devastating from Alex Pereira. Honestly, so much respect to Khalil Rountree. As we said, his stock has only gone up. I just hope that that fourth round hasn't done the damage that it looked like it possibly might do, where it can change a fighter, it can cause long-lasting damage. I really hope that we see Khalil Rountree take some good time off and then come back an improved fighter, ready to push again for another title shot. So yeah, Khalil Rountree is an absolute warrior. I can't wait to see him fight again. But let's move on to the third thing that we learned from this fight. And it's how Alex Pereira deals with Southpaw fighters. A lot of the talk in the build-up to this fight was that Pereira struggles against Southpaws. We'd seen him losing to Southpaws in Glory. He struggled with Adesanya sometimes when he switched to Southpaw. And based on the first two rounds, it did seem as though this theory was true. Khalil Rountree could not miss with that overhand left. It was connecting time and time again, forcing Pereira to move backwards. A lot of these shots didn't have quite as much impact as they looked because Pereira was moving backwards. He wasn't taking them clean necessarily, but quite a lot of them were clean. And it did seem as though Pereira didn't really have an answer for them. One thing that we'd spoken about in the pre-fight video was how Pereira moves off in a straight line. You see the way that Israel Adesanya, he'll take 2 or 3 steps back and then circle off, dipping a shoulder, slipping out the way. Pereira very rarely does this, and it's definitely something that could be exposed by fighters. And Khalil Rountree did a good job of dealing with this in the first round. He used blitzes in straight lines to not necessarily connect with Pereira in the first 2 punches, but the third punch would always connect. So if you are purely looking at those first 2 rounds, it did seem as though Pereira was struggling with the southpaw stance. And then there was that body kick, the big left kick from Rountree that did appear to hurt Alex Pereira. Now, it's hard to say how much it did hurt him, but for someone who generally has such a good poker face, Pereira did seem bothered by it. We'd seen Pereira stopped with strikes to the body in Glory before. I'm not necessarily saying that it's a weak area for him, but that was a really interesting moment in the fight. And if Rountree had had a bit more momentum, a bit more gas at that point of the fight, we could have seen him really targeting the body, doing something different. But it was an interesting look, and that left kick from the southpaw fighter to an orthodox fighter is a really important weapon. In Muay Thai, that is the kick. So based on what we've just discussed there, it would appear that we have learnt that Pereira does struggle against southpaw fighters. But then the third and fourth rounds happened, and you kind of have to dial back that analysis a little bit. Whilst it may lead you to believe that a southpaw fighter with a bit of wrestling could be the man to beat Pereira, the fact that he can adapt, except that the left hook isn't going to work as much, and then go to the right hand, work the jab. We're going to get onto all of that. But this is a question mark. So the third thing that we learnt is that the jury is still out. Is the southpaw stance a weakness for Pereira? Or is it like any fight that he's in, he takes a little bit of time sometimes to adapt, to get the distance, and then, look, round 4 happened. We can see how effective he is at finishing any opponent. And that leads us perfectly to the 4th thing that we learnt, and that is Alex Pereira showing us a new side of his game. Not just adapting, but a few weapons that he doesn't necessarily favour, but led him to win in this fight. You just have to take a quick look at all of Poatan's fights in the UFC to know that the jab to the body, the calf kick and the left hook are pretty much a recipe for a KO against any fighter, but that wasn't the case in this fight. Other than the calf kick that we've already discussed, there are 2 things that won Pereira this fight. Firstly, it's the jab. Not enough people, I've already seen a couple of breakdowns, and not enough people are talking about this jab. Most of that damage you can see on Rountree's face came from the jab. It was an absolute piston. It comes so low, it's so hard to see it coming, and it just landed time and time again on Rountree. It caused the damage, it stunned him a couple of times, and then it really let Pereira open up with the right hands, the uppercuts, that eventually finished him off. The second thing that he did was his distance management. It was excellent in this fight after the first round and a half. In the first round, he was gauging that distance. As I mentioned, he was moving back, taking shots kind of on his shoulder, glancing shots to his face, but they weren't clean shots. And this was so important when he became the aggressor. We saw him landing the jab and then getting out of the way of any counters. The counters from Khalil Rountree were kind of wild in rounds 3 and 4, but nevertheless they would have been devastating had they landed. They were big overhands, they were big hooks, and Pereira had the distance down to a T. He was landing his shot and then just getting out of the way of the counter and then unloading on Khalil Rountree. So Pereira's jab, he's adapting to the jab because he uses the jab a lot, but he uses it a lot to the body to set up the left hook. So his jab straight down the pipe to the face of Rountree and his distance management won him this fight. I have no doubts about that. So we definitely learnt in this fight that Pereira is not a one-trick pony. He uses the left hook because why wouldn't you? It's a nuclear bomb, it's devastating, it will knock out anyone when it lands flush. But it wasn't going to land flush in this fight. Pereira accepted that. He accepted that the high kick was vulnerable to a counter, so he stopped throwing that. And then he decided to stick to the calf kick, the jab, and getting his distance right. And that's what won him the fight. It was excellent. So we've learnt 4 things so far. Firstly, it's that the calf kick is an amazing insurance policy. Pereira doesn't need to panic. He doesn't need to chase fights. He can just tap away. He knows that those shots are going to pay off in the end. Secondly, we learnt that Khalil Rountree is an absolute warrior. What a heart, and what a game plan heading into it. Thirdly, we learnt that yes, whilst Pereira did seem to struggle initially with the southpaw stance, the fact that he did end up finishing Rountree in such a destructive, such a clear manner, it's really hard to say that the southpaw is a real weakness of his. And fourthly, we learned that Pereira can adapt. He's not a one-trick left hook pony. He's got so many tools in his arsenal. And when he wants to change it up, he can get the finish any way that he wants. Before we get on to the 5th thing that we learnt, I'm going to ask you to subscribe, give this video a like. If you do follow the UFC, if you do like these kind of breakdown videos, prediction videos, make sure you do give me a follow. Anyway, let's get on to the final thing that we learnt, and that is what's next for Alex Pereira. In his post-fight speech with Joe Rogan, he spoke about the Sean Strickland against Dricus du Plessis fight. He also mentioned that because he's training with Sean Strickland, that would be a really tricky situation if Strickland was to win. He does want the Dricus fight. Naturally, Dricus wants to go up to get 2 belts, and Pereira wants to go down to get 2 belts. So when you've got a situation like this, where Pereira wants to move down and fight Dricus, and Dricus wants to move up and fight Pereira, how do you resolve it? Personally, I think that Dricus, although he has less bargaining power because he's less of a superstar, he is more deserving of moving up than Pereira is at moving down. Pereira already had a run at middleweight. Dricus hasn't had a run at light heavyweight. I think he deserves to go up and challenge Pereira for that title if he beats Sean Strickland. There is also a fight out there that I keep talking about, and it's not the Magomed Ankalaev against Alexander Rakic winner. It's not that one, although that would definitely make sense as well. But it's the John Jones fight. I know that people are probably rolling their eyes already, saying that, look, he's retiring after Stipe. It is what it is. That might be the case, but I still think, commercially, when John Jones beats Stipe next year, summer, International Fight Week 2025, John Jones versus Alex Pereira at heavyweight, it would probably be one of the highest grossing fights of all time in the UFC. John Jones would probably fancy it because of the wrestling aspect. Pereira would fancy it in terms of legacy. Let's see that fight happen. But anyway, it's unclear what's next. Possibly Dricus if he gets through Strickland based on that post-fight speech. But these are 5 things that we learned from this fight. But these are 5 things that we learned from Pereira versus Rountree Jr. Hope you enjoyed the video and I'll see you guys later.